Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Enhance Your AV Workflow with connectcad. My name is Lindsay Lee, and I'm the marketing specialist for the entertainment industry here at Vectorworks. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, and the on-demand version will be posted to Vectorworks University, where you could find this webinar as well as all past webinars. And we'll also be sending out an email with the recording to everyone who registered. Lastly, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please write them in the question box, which is located right in your control panel, and we'll save some time at the end to get through them. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Tom White. Tom is the UK Entertainment Solutions Specialist with Vectorworks. Previously, Tom worked as the Chief Electrician at the Bush Theatre in London, Head of Lighting at Loughborough Festival Opera and Regent's Park Open Air Theatre in London, and Deputy Chief Electrician at the Grade 1 listed Bath Theatre L'Oreal in West of England. He did numerous UK tours for Frantic Assembly and relights and adaptations for English touring opera. In 2013, while touring worldwide with Shakespeare Company Propeller, Tom won the inaugural Joe Fraser Award. Tom still designs a handful of productions each year, and in 2021, he won the What's on Stage Offie Award for Best Lighting Design. So let's give Tom a warm welcome, and we'll go ahead and get started.
So welcome to the webinar. Thanks all for coming. My name is Tom White and I'm the UK Solutions Specialist, predominantly for entertainment. My background is in theatre lighting, and I've done some sound and video stuff over the years. I've also been a technician for music concerts and events at the Roundhouse in Camden. So what I'm going to show you today is the webinar file that we looked at last time. So this is essentially a previously used demo file where we looked at creating AV elements within a model and then their corresponding schematic elements within connectcad. So we're going to be covering a similar workflow today, but we're going to be looking at a few more things in greater detail. So we're going to be looking at how you would then go about adding, for example, a surround or delay system within an auditorium, how you could model that within Vectorworks, and also how you could then issue a schematic for those elements as well. So, as you might remember last time, we talked a little bit about importing DWGs and how you can import a wide variety of file formats within Vectorworks itself. Once you've imported DWGs, there is nothing to stop you from working with the 2D line geometry and creating extrudes just by using the Control-E shortcuts. So here I can enter a specific height for my walls, etc., and I can begin to pull out a 3D venue from the auditorium. I can also right click on various objects and I can run create objects from shapes commands, which enables me to create things such as lighting pipes or even soft goods, and I can then specify a height for those as well. Other useful things that can be done with the 2D line geometry is if you already have some pre-existing 2D cable runs, then you'll find that in the Create Objects from Shapes menu, there is also a cable path. So we can say, let's make that a cable path. So that's kind of working with DWGs. I've actually already spent a bit of time working with this model, as you'll see in the next save view, where we can actually view this model in 3D. I'm just going to orbit this model using my 3D space mouse, and you'll notice that I'm also showing you this with the clip cube. The clip cube is actually a really useful tool. It enables you to section through a model. I'm just going to zoom out a tiny bit so get it a bit smoother. There we go. So I can also just have a look at this in terms of where to place elements, etc., working within tricky 3D geometry. The clip cube tool itself is hidden a little bit in this menu on the right hand side, so you can actually add show clip cube up here. Once you do that, it will show you a teapot cut in half just on the top, And the way the clip cube works is you can select an item first and then activate the clip cube tool, and the clip cube will then wrap itself to that item, which is quite useful. You can also not select everything and just turn the clip cube tool on, and then in that instance the clip cube will wrap itself to the entire extent of the model. Clicking on the faces of the clip cube enables you to push through and section at any time, and the four blue dots in the middle also enable you to rotate the clip cube around a particular axis. Another useful tip when you're using the clip cube is to temporarily suspend the snapping with the apostrophe key, because otherwise, as you'll see here, the clip cube does like to try and snap to lots of other geometry. So suspend snapping is quite useful. Now, as well as rotating the clip cube as you like, you can also pick up the clip cube and move it through a particular point as well. So it's a very versatile tool for not only for modeling, you can also use it to create section views. So if this is a section view that we want to make a viewport of, for example, I can now right click on one of these red faces and I can create a section viewport from this face. So I just select a new sheet layer, click OK, and there we go. So it's quite useful for creating quick section views of a model we can then print out or export as PDFs. Okay, so if you remember last time we did the presentation, we talked a little bit about inserting a video projector into a drawing. So if I were to just grab the projection tool from the event design toolset, I'm just going to recap this for those of you who may not have seen this last time around. So the way that these plugin tools work in Vectorworks is that you essentially preset the options that you want within here. So let's go for a front projector. We'll choose a specific screen size. And then we can tell it what it's made from. Does it have a border around it at all? What are the widths of this? So this is essentially a parametric object that's going to create some geometry based on what we tell it in here. We can also see the coverage zones, we can see how well the screen is going to be viewed from various angles, and we can specify a couple of different options for how we want the screen to be supported and the depth of that, and whether there's a motor present or not. We can also edit a screen image, so doing this means we can assign a logo, and these textures themselves can actually emit light as well. Also, when you're looking for these textures, you'll notice the video screen textures are actually at the bottom of this mini resource manager that's opened up here, and we can actually choose some specific screen textures in here. Selecting a vision video source will enable you to assign obviously an NDI source here, or also you could assign a QuickTime file which will then play back within Vision itself. So here is something I've already configured. We're going to show the projector cone. Which projector are we going to use? So you'll notice here, there, and when you are using this tool yourselves for the first time, you'll get a small selection of projectors within this list. However, you'll notice here I've actually added my own projector. So these projectors in this list are essentially a file within the Vectorworks libraries that can be customized to include your favorite projectors. I'm just use the default one for now. I'm going to leave the lens shift, etc. Where do we want the projector to be rigged in terms of want it to be centered? So we want it to be aligned to the top of the projector. So what you'll see here really is there are loads of options in terms of how you want your projector rigged. And we can also display various lens information, for example, which is quite useful, and any other information that we want displayed around the projector at all through either a data tag or just using the text fields in this instance. Okay. We can tell it what the distributed weight of the screen is, should we want to. I'm not going to go into any more detail for now, let's just place one. So if I click OK, you'll notice that based on the lens that I've already selected, I'm getting an ideal distance, which is actually pretty good, isn't it? I think it's because I'm cheating and I've done this before, so I've already kind of worked this out. However, if you haven't worked this out, and you would like to place the screen and projector separately. So just to recap, this first option places the two objects as a single entity like so. This second option will enable you to place the screen first. Just kind of zoom in here, I'm just going to place it just upstage of the proscenium. And then once you've placed the screen and specified a rotation, you can then double click to insert the projector. And what you'll see here is we're getting a lens label, which I've customized. So I'm just going to move that to here. And what you'll also see is that if we then edit this position slightly, then the lens will also update itself, as you can see here, so we can see exactly what angle we need to get our projection screen in here. Let's have a look at this in a 3D view for a moment. Okay, I'll talk about the camera in just a moment, but it's often a good idea to just quickly place the projector, and then we can have a look and play with some of the various options we have available to us. And there we have the screen, etc. These bars are essentially just really an aid for us to make sure that we're going to get shots around the proscenium. We're not going to get any strange plaster line shadows, things like that. Okay. I won't go into too much more detail about this now. That's pretty much it for the projector screen tool. And I will just quickly show you the speaker tool. So the last time we looked at this file, we looked at the speaker array tool with a ground stacked array. So I'll just quickly show you a flown array, and then we'll also look at creating some surrounds or delay speakers around this circle front balcony rail that we've got here. Okay, so when it comes to placing speaker arrays, if I'll check us back in the next save view, like so. I'm just going to go and get my speaker array tool. The way I prefer to work when it comes to placing speaker arrays would be to maybe specify a name first of all, and then just place the bumpers to begin with. So I'm just going to click OK. I'm going to place a bumper. Let's have a look. Just either side of the stage. Not really sure where. I'll double click to insert one here, and I'll double click to insert one here. Now I'm going to select both of these bumpers. I'm going to use a very useful shortcut now, just to have a look at these, which is Command 0 on a Mac or Control 0 on a PC. And that enables me to place myself in the model just with a single click and the direction that I want to look. I'll say I'll be at 2 meters high at that point. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these and I'm going to fly them to a particular height. So I'll say let's put you both at 5 meters. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so there's my arrays. I'd probably take them up a little bit higher, to be honest. Just going to select both of these again. Let's take them out a bit more. So we'll try 7 meters this time. And with them both selected, I'm going to choose configure array. And now I can work on both of them at exactly the same time. You can also obviously create one and use the mirror tool to create a reflected copy on the other side. But let's just try this. So the first page means that we can customize our bumper. So I could, if I wanted to, add a center extension bar, for example, for maybe a second hoist on the back as well. We can also look at what different render mode we want to view this preview in over here on the right hand side. So essentially I can either choose a specific bumper from the libraries in here. As you'll see here, there's lots of different libraries on the left hand side. There's a D&B folder. I'm just going to use a catalog one for now. For this time around though, we'll stick to using these J12s. I will mention that we can choose a simpler catalog, and I'll also just talk a bit about why you would do that. So what you can see here, if we look at this in a wireframe view, is a very simple version of this speaker. Okay, and if we compare the simplicity and the kind of efficient geometry of the simple catalog speaker with a specific symbol instead. So let's look at, we were working with some D&B speakers, weren't we, before? So I'm just going to choose the one that's already in this file. So what you can see here then is that in selecting a slightly more complex symbol, we get an added amount of realism. We also get the dispersion is in here as well, and we can't edit these. I'll talk a bit about this as well in a moment. But what you'll see here is that we have slightly more complex geometry, and for this particular project, it doesn't really matter too much, to be totally honest with you. If I had a massive arena and I maybe had kind of upwards of, I don't know, 150 boxes of J, then I think I would probably regret that at some point, depending on the machine I was using. So essentially, the more efficient geometry can be found within the catalog, items versus the manufacturer's detailed symbols. So for kind of like small to medium projects, this is fine. For really big projects, you need to ask yourself, do I need that information? I will also explain how we get that horizontal dispersion information into some of the other speaker objects. So the idea being with this array builder tool is we choose a bumper, which we have done already. And as I've already come in and done this once before, as those of you who remember the last time we ran the webinar, what I'll do is I'll just clear out on the left hand side what I've done. So I'm going to change this from ground stacked to be flown by motors, like so. And over on the left hand side is where we have our builder. So we already have a bumper, so I'm not going to put any more in. There's our extension bar, but I am going to choose the type of speaker we want to use, and I'm just going to put 5 J boxes in here, and I'm just going to choose the bottom 3, and I'll give them quite a severe angle, like so. Now we can actually dip in and out of this as often as possible, so I've just changed the splay angle there, which in Vectorworks is called angle relative to preceding. I'm going to click OK, and what you'll see here is nothing happens. So what we just need to do is, because we've done this for the first time, we'll just need to make sure, I'll turn it off first, that I now select populate array. Okay, and then we can now see that those 2 speaker arrays have now been populated like so. I'm just going to change my perspective to be a bit wider so we can see it a little bit better. It would be really good, wouldn't it, to see if we can see exactly where we were hitting with these boxes. If I were just to select the speakers by their object type, like so, I can then turn on the dispersion for all of those speakers, and I can see exactly where they're going to hit. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, and obviously I'm going to come through a wall in a moment, so we'll just change the layer options to be grey snap others so we can see this. There we go, so we're getting a pretty good idea of where they're going to hit. So actually pretty much all of my boxes are going to miss the front rows, so I probably need to learn my bumper in, but for now let's just have a look at this. So I'm going to use the same select similar tool to select the bumpers, and then with both bumpers selected I'm going to select configure array, go to the array, and what we'll do here then is we'll also just rake, I'll probably put these at say 12, forget what the maximum is for this, and we'll say let's put you at 7 and let's put you at 5. And then we can also, should we wish, we can actually rake the bumper itself as well if we want to. Okay, so bumper angle, let's put you at -3. Okay, click OK. Okay, there we go. Let's have a look at this. So yeah, I think it's definitely better. I'm probably still going to need to bring them in quite a bit, but they should do pretty much everybody underneath the balcony, pretty much. Maybe the back of the stalls, maybe. But obviously, while we're talking about the back of the stalls, we're probably going to need to put some delays in, as obviously this is going to hit some obstructions at some point. Okay, so that's pretty much it for speaker arrays. I'm just going to turn off the speaker arrays dispersion again. When you actually use the speaker array dispersion, a class is used to display that information. So you can, if you want to, just turn off that specific class if you don't want to see it, like so. Okay, but what I'll do is I'll just tell the speakers themselves for now to disappear. Okay, so the next thing we'll take a look at then is how we get these delays just to poke under the balconies, just to fill all of the seats as we go further back through the stalls. So I'm going to show you a workflow called duplicate along path, which I think is really useful for working with speakers. Before I do that though, I just wanted to explain at the back end of some of this. So you may be wondering how that dispersion is getting its information, and essentially all of the speakers within Vectorworks, you'll have a record associated with them called the ATS speaker mod data record, and in here we can actually change the specific dispersions for this. So I'm not sure if you can do it in J, but I know that there are some D&B speakers that you can rotate the cones in. And so to do that, I would probably duplicate an existing J12, and I would edit the record associated with it just to, swap those dispersion values around just to replicate that. Okay, so this has just essentially just been inserted with the speaker tool itself, where you can just insert individual speakers. Now, as well as we've got the access to the symbol libraries within Vectorworks, again, if you are going to be working with literally hundreds and thousands of these, then it's likely that you may want to be using the catalog items as well. These catalog items are useful because you can essentially use these to just create a box like so, and then you can then manipulate that box. So if you know what the sizes are, like so, and then 300, and then 600, you can basically use this to create your own speaker. And once you're happy with this, so if I were to just, let's change the back width for a minute so we get more of a rectangular box, I can then save this to the library. So once I've put all the information in that I need, I can then say save type to catalog, and that's gonna, so I can give this a name as well. So it is quite useful because this My Speaker can now not only be used in conjunction with the speaker tool, but also with the array tool as well itself. Okay, so I've inserted a single speaker, as you can see here. Let's just have a look at this in a 3D view. You'll see here it's got a variety of different things going on here in terms of its yoke and hook clamp as well. So the support you can change to be like flown motors, for example. You can have it put on a tripod, like so. Let's just undo that for a second, and we'll just go back to yoked down. So you can also have yoked up. So if you wanted to over-rig the speaker to make these sort of more like front fills for the balcony, which I guess doesn't really make any sense, but you could do that if you wanted to. So you can have it over-rigged. Let's go back to where we were before. And as well as that, we can then also play around with the tilt angle. So let's just turn on the dispersion for this particular speaker for a minute so we can see what it's doing. Cool. And then we can just play with the tilt. So that's minus 55 at the minute. We could say, let's say minus 90, for example, pointing straight down, or near enough. Okay, so you can actually play around with this and see what changes happen. I'm just going to tweak the listening height, as that will affect what height this stops at. So we're hopefully going to try and get these to see underneath the balcony. So in an ideal world, that we would just be able to just duplicate them all along here. This is exactly what we're going to do. So to do this, I'll turn off the dispersion hatching for a moment, and I'll leave the dispersion range on. I'm just going to drag this to one side. So the command we're going to look at is a command called duplicate along path, but the first thing we need is we actually need a path object. Okay. So it won't just work, it won't be happy with us giving it the current lighting pipe. It's going to want its actual path. So if I were to just, let's do force select for a minute. That's a right click command. And if I were to just double click to enter this hanging position, I'm just going to rob the 2D line from this. So that's a lighting pipe. Okay, so if I were to just right click on this and select edit path for a minute, I can actually Control A in here and Control C to copy, exit the path, exit the profile. Cool, so now I've just stolen the path from the balcony. So I'm just going to go to the AV layer, and again to do that I will right click on the speaker and I'll do force select, and then here I'll just do Control V. There we go. and I will just nudge it into position. Now, why do we need this? So we basically want a path object to duplicate the speakers along with. So if I now just select both of these objects, and what I'll do is so if for now I'll just select both of these objects, I'll just turn that off for a minute. There we go. So two objects, then I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate Along Path. And I could actually say, well, I want 10 duplicates. Let's say I want 11 copies. And it's important here, by the way, it's actually detected the path. If it's an unusual shape or a closed shape, you'll be able to toggle between the two shapes you have selected, and you'll just need to tell it which one is the path object. And the path object is obviously the objects upon which we're going to duplicate these along. So as well as having just a number of duplicates, we could then hit preview to see where they're going to go. What's important to note here is we are centering the object on the path, and if I don't have tangent to path selected, what you'll see is obviously they will stay in the same orientation. If I do have tangent to path selected, they will then follow the orientation of the curve. So I'm quite happy with those. I'm going to click OK. Because they're all currently still selected, we can then have a look at the dispersion for all of them along here. There we go, not bad. I think they'll need a little bit of tweaking, but as you can see, it's a good start. There we are. Excellent. Okay, so the camera tool then. So this is essentially now the video camera tool, where you can just click to place a camera. You can also, should you wish, change the support to be, again, there's lots of different ways to do this. So everything within the camera is customizable from the base to the body. So if I just check use symbol for stand, I can then, actually use a specific symbol should I so wish. There we go, just like that. So again, I can toggle through each of these as well. I'm going to turn that off for now because I'm going to use the rigging that I have, the hardware already. So again, I can choose a different lens, which will then not only change the lens physically on the outside of the camera, but it will also change what you are capable of seeing within the constraints of that specific lens. Let's just have a quick look at this. If I just select activate camera, there we go, I can see what the camera is looking at. I can have a look at it in a shaded view. I can tilt it up and down. Obviously it's switching to wireframe because it's going to be quicker. I can roll it left to right, and I can pan it left and right as well. And I'll just undo all of those because I think I had it focused reasonably well. Okay, and then we'll just go back to a shaded view. Okay, so the other thing you can do with these cameras is you can also use them to create viewports. So with the camera still active on the right hand side, we can say let's make a nice viewport of this, and we can have it on a new sheet layer. Again, when you're making camera viewports like this, do make sure you give a nice DPI. So I'm going to go with 200 for now. You could arguably go even higher. And there we have it. Okay, so again, that's a little bit fuzzy. We could increase the DPI a little bit. The other thing we can do is, even though we're just looking at a shaded rendering, we could also play around with shadows. Other things you can do with shaded, actually, is you can turn off textures and colors, and you just get this really nice kind of white card effect, which I'll just show you now. Okay, I need to tweak some of the lighting as well. Again, you could play for years with this. Okay, so let's go back to the design layer now. And then we'll have a look at connectcad. So we'll just cut back to speakers as well. So we've just placed within the model, we've just placed some speakers around our circle. Okay, they're going to be our surrounds of our array. Let's now have a look at connectcad. And this is the video playback system that we created in the last webinar. But as again, there's been quite a few improvements to the workflow that I wanted to show you in 2022. So connectcad is basically devices and circuits. The devices you can move, and the circuits obviously redraw themselves. It's obviously a signal flow diagram. It's a schematics tool. It's nothing to do with the real world cables, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. So if I were to just have a quick look at some devices. Again, these specific devices can now be customized, so you can add your own fields to these devices. So a good example of this would be, let's try and find something that we need some additional information on. So the foyer display, for example, might require some additional information. So let's now, I'm going to show you a workflow where you could add additional fields to these devices. So let's say, for example, that there is a specific source that has to be selected for it to work, obviously with HDMI1 or whatever. Or another example of this could be that there is a username and password for this display. There probably isn't, but just in case. So let's work on the premise that there's a username and a password for this. So what we'll do is we'll just create a new record format within this file. And I'm going to create a new record format. And I'm going to call it connectcad device additional params. If I click new, let's say there's an IP address as well, and that could be a number to, I can't remember how many, but I'll just put lots of decimal places. And let's create another parameter called username. And then we'll just create another one called password. Okay, so we've created that as an additional record, and then the next part of this process is obviously this device. It has fields already associated with it, but this is pretty much it. Okay, the data now, if I just select the device and I'll say, well as all of the plugin data on the shape pane, I want to attach an additional record. So I'm going to select attach record, and I'm going to use connectcad device additional parameters, and I'll say, right, well, this particular device is going to be username, login is my name, and the password is admin1234. Isn't that brilliant? Cool. So that now data is now associated with this, which is great. Okay. However, it would be great to display this data, wouldn't it? So if I double click to enter this device, and then I'm just going to put some text in here, I'll just say custom text. It doesn't really matter what this text says, to be totally honest with you. If I just make it a little bit more legible, though, it's not very readable at the minute, is it? And I'll make it, there we go. And what I'll do is I'll just create another copy. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key, click and drag. There we are. So this custom text now is linked text, and I'm going to link it to an additional record. So we'll want to link it to the additional parameters we specified, username and login. There we go. And once I've done that, I'm just going to do the same with this one. And the field again is not the device field, but it is a password. There we go. And we'll exit the device, and you'll see here this now says Tom W admin1234. So that's a great new feature, attaching custom records. As you can probably see, the options are pretty endless for this in terms of what you want to create. Okay, so let's now look at creating a device from a list. So we'll look at the surrounds specifically. And here we have another new feature which was in 2022, where you can create equipment from a list. Now the key thing here is that the make and model must exactly reference the same name that is used in the connectcad libraries. So one way to check this but use the device builder and just check that you've got things as they should be in terms of how they are named, etc. So make sure that they use the same names as that are those that are in here. And then quite simply, it's just a case of connectcad create devices from worksheet, and the worksheet is called equipment list. Click OK. So this is how it's going to work. It's going to give you a header row. We're going to look at quantities, make and model, field 1, field 2. Click OK. There we go. So I'm just going to zoom out, and there's our equipment, which it's just made across here. Perfect. Now what you'll notice here, some of this stuff I'll just delete for now, we don't really need. In terms of like, the main thing we're interested in are those surround speakers, which I do believe are here. So I select one of these. And what I will do is I'm just going to turn on some other classes just to make sure we are looking at the whole picture. There we go, cool. So audio, loudspeaker, etc, etc. Brilliant. So again, I'm not too bothered about the microphones. We'll sack those off for now. You'll also notice that when it did this, it created them on a certain size, first of all. And also, if we look really closely, you'll see that it's using a square rectangle, okay? Something that's interesting is if I were to just delete these for now, like so, and the size of the objects that get created are created based on the current snap grid settings. If I were to make these a lot bigger, and I'm just going to change that to 6 and this to 24, and before we do any more, I'm just also going to change the sample device and explain why that's important. So when we run that command, connectcad uses the sample device to create those objects. So try and find that in here. And if I now were to do, obviously you'll notice here there's a little number 3 next to it, so we know that it's a 3D symbol. So if I edit 3D component, I can now say, right, well, double click to enter the device. That's just a rectangle, which I don't really like that rectangle. I might just prefer a rounded rectangle. You know, why not? Why not have a rounded rectangle? So I'll just crudely draw my rounded rectangle in, send it back. There we go. I'll just make sure that the sockets all line up correctly. This is quite important, by the way. Make sure everything is in the right place. Okay. And with this rounded rectangle, I want to increase, they're currently set to be symmetrical, which I like, but let's just increase the distance slightly. So that's 10 millimeters. Let's go for 2. There we go. Exit the device, so exit the symbol, and let's run that command again. Now, this is a really great command because it will check what you currently have. So we've deleted all the existing stuff, so it will create everything again. But if I hadn't deleted things, it will check what is currently needed. So create devices from worksheet, equipment list, and click OK. And there they have it. Look, this is better, isn't it? Much nicer. So much easier to read, as we can see here. Excellent. Cool. So I have the UPSs, which we're not going to use, some audio interfaces, a mixer, mics, and the loudspeakers. Excellent. Cool. And that is how you can customize your sample devices and automatically generate lots of devices by using the create equipment from list. Okay, so I'm just going to delete some of these other objects that are redundant, and again, so that we're not here all day, I'll delete some of these other objects, and I'll essentially just align these neatly. So if I were to just drop this one to here, so if I now select these two, I just line these two up, so that's number 1, 2, 3, and the 4 is at the bottom. If I now select all of these and then right click on the bottom one, I can align distribute vertically spacing, and I can align distribute align left. Okay, pretty good. Again, it's not perfect, but it's not a bad start. So the next thing I want to do is I need to work out an amplifier. I need to put an amp somewhere to plug these into, and yes, I should probably do with the desk and all that stuff, but let's just put an amp in for now. And what I'll do is I won't spend ages looking for one. I'm just going to create a very crude amplifier. So I'm going to make a new a device, and I'm going to say model is TW amp made by 3M. Now I'm not going to make this again, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. So I'm just going to, when I finish, I'll create a temporary device. Before I do that, let's just say that we have two XLR inputs, and we have four outputs. Okay, so we're specifying inputs and outputs, and we're choosing exactly what we want to send out. And then, as well as choosing the signal type, we can also choose the connector type. Now for it will be a female. And let's just say it's got some XLR inputs, yeah? Okay, so we can specify inputs and outputs, and we should probably give it a power input. I don't actually know if I've got one of these on here yet. So we'll just put power foreign signal type for now. Power input unknown connector type. It obviously wouldn't be a 32 amp, would it? So unknown connector type, we'll just change that to something that we know to be or we'll just say foreign connector type for now, that's fine. Okay, and we'll say the power can go in on the left. So this is a physical device, okay, so I'm going to select device type is physical, and I'll say, well, the height I'll just sort of guess for now. Width is going to go into a 19-inch rack, so we'll just do that. 600 mils deep, and then we can just tell it how many rack queues high it's going to be. Is it a modular device? No. The power is, say these are 500 watt amplifiers, and let's say they're quite heavy, around 8 kilograms. So we'll just say create a temporary device like so, and there are our amplifiers. Okay. Excellent. So we're going to need to give it a unique name. So I'll just call this one AMP1, for example. There we go. So we'll just put this up near the top. And now I can then say, well, let's create amps 2, 3, and 4, etc. So we've got 4 outputs. Let's just say they're 2-channel amps. Okay, that's probably more likely. So we're going to need, for this very simple schematic, we're going to need just 2 of these. So again, I could just do copy, drag and click like so. The other workflow I wanted to show you is you could also just use the device tool, choose an existing device, and choose a multiple insertion like that. There we go. Okay, and as with all of these things, don't forget that you can also just use spotlight numbering to number your devices. So display tag, we'll call it amp. And then starting at 1, we'll do device name at the same time as well. I'll just make them the same for now, and we'll number them from the top to the bottom. Click OK. AMP1 and AMP2, that's done. Very simple, fantastic. So let's say, for example, that these amps are in a rack in a substage area, and they go through a facility panel and they go to the auditorium where our speakers are. Okay, so to show that on a schematic, we just need to create a sort of patch panel. So if we were to just say, well, we'll use a connector panel, and we'll create a new connector panel, and we'll call it amp room to front of the house. Click OK. And again, I'm just going to use the distributed modes of this, linear array mode, and we'll say the connectors need to be NL4, don't they? Like so. Probably female for now. Right, so if I now just say, well, let's do a little array of these. So I'm just going to say that's probably enough for these. Well, let's do 6 to be safe. There we go. So I can now, once I've done this, edit the device array, and I can also number these as well. So I can select renumber the ports, starting at 1, for example, and click OK, and that's it. And that's going to number those. So 1.101, etc. Okay, now I can use the circuit tool to connect these together. So I can say, well, we'll come out of the speak on output, go into that panel like so, and we'll skip 2 because that's just the same as 1. There we go. So we're using 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now what you can see here is it's not very clear, is it, where these go? So let's just select all of these. We can change to be a rounded line, and we can also change to be a chamfer, like so. Or we can use arrows, and that will actually tell us where they go as well. So it'll actually plug stuff, tell us where stuff is. Let's just move that for a minute. Okay. Now let's just go back for a moment to change these to polylines, or rather my favorite, rounded. And we're just going to use the reroute tool to just space these out, just so it becomes a little bit easier to read. So we'll click there, like so. Okay. So normally I would be spending a lot more time on this, and I would be getting everything neatly lined up, etc. And I would change the snap grid so that the sockets all line up neatly, but I don't have time for that now. So this is just really a very quick schematic for you guys. Okay, so I've just popped back to the AV elements layer, and I'm just going to run a cable path from a facility panel up to our surround speakers. So if I just use the Command 0 shortcut just to put myself in the model, there we go. I'm just going to turn shaded view on. Okay, and have a wander around with my 3D space mouse. Okay. Let's just assume for 1 minute that there is a facility panel just behind this curtain. So you've got a few choices when it comes to drawing cable routes. You can specify an automatic plane, and you can literally just draw along the 3D axis, much as you would with any of the 3D modeling tool sets. So I'm just going to come up this wall, like so, up here. I'm just going to come across at this point and jump across to there. Okay, let's have a look at it in a 3D view. It's not bad, to be fair. It's pretty good. There is an alternative. You'll notice that as you are drawing cable paths, you can also specify a cable height. So if I was actually drawing this in 2D, like so, I could then say, well, at this point, this then jumps to a specific cable height, which I can enter into this field here. Okay, let's get back into the model. There we go. Excellent. Now, so I can report lengths of these runs a little bit later on, I'm just going to give it a particular name. So where it says ID, HL for house left, and panel to bulk rail. Okay. The cable tool interacts perfectly with the cable route tool. You can see the benefits of using a space mouse for this task. So I can join this, and it comes out at the other end. At which point I can physically run it along the wall, like so. Again, this is using the same 3D capabilities as the path tool. I've made a slight mistake, so let's hit backspace, come across to here, down to this point, and we'll just finish up at that speaker. Okay. The only one we're really interested in, so that you can understand how the cable tool interacts with connectcad, We're only really interested in this cable object here, which we need to give a name to. So if we call this cable run ID house left auditorium to bulk. Okay, now that we've run our cable path and our cable, let's head back to the schematic layer. I can now select these cables here, like so. I can choose that cable run from this menu over here. So house left, auditorium to balcony. So now connectcad understands that these circuits are following that specific cable. As you can see, it's also populated a little bubble on here. You can control that. So in terms of how cables are displayed with bubbles, etc., and information, you can customize not only the type of bubbles, etc., but also the actual information that gets displayed on the specific circuit. Okay, so the schematic circuits now understand that they correlate to specific spotlight circuits. We can now do the same process with the actual speaker objects themselves. So let's head back to the AV elements layer. And as you can see here, we can see our cable that's plugged in. Just going to zoom in over here. And I'm going to use the equipment item tool, which sounds a bit odd, but I'll explain why. So in connectcad 2022, the equipment item tool can also be used to tag a specific object. So in this case, it's going to tag that particular speaker. So I could tag each of these. And then providing I give them a correct name, then the two items will become linked. So device name, audio loudspeaker 1. I'll just head back to the rack elevation layer and I'll make sure that the equipment item tag has the same name. And I can do the same thing here, like so, but that's obviously number 2. Now what's the point of doing this? Well, if we now go back to the schematic layer, what you'll see here is at any point I can choose this device within the schematic and I can now select edit equipment, which will actually take me to that speaker object within the model. So we can now link the connectcad devices to the actual spotlight speaker objects as well. Okay, now you can basically tag any plugin objects with these connectcad equipment items. There is also an alternative. So a good example for this next thing I'm going to show you is, let's say for example we have an amp rack in the flight case. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look in the resource managers for a case or a trunk. So I'm just going to import that specific case. Because something else that you can do with the equipment item tool is, let's say for example, it's not a plugin object that you want to associate with an item on the schematic. So a good example of this would be the amps, for example. So if I just head back to here, and amp 1 and 2, I just make sure I have the correct device name. And what I can do here is I can place an equipment item object just on the 3D layer, like so, and then I can just say use symbol, and I can choose the rack case from the resource manager. Okay, and then providing again that is the same name, that is amp1. Again, when we are in our surround schematic layer, I can select that amp and I can say edit equipment, and it will take me to the actual rack just there. Pretty useful. Okay, so hopefully now you can understand how connectcad and Spotlight can work together in terms of devices and equipment items and circuits and Spotlight cables. Okay, so that is one possible workflow. I'd like to now just create some of these amps as equipment items and actually put them into a 2D rack. So again, I'll probably do this by selecting these objects and running the connectcad command. layout, create equipment. And again, I'll just choose selected devices only, click OK. So these are the amplifiers that I'm using, like so. Again, it's only created one of them. Now, if you remember, this will be because we've already got one in the 3D model. Again, we substituted it for that particular rack. So I'm actually just going to cheekily delete that because I'm going to show you how to put these items in a specific rack. So again, we will just run the same command again, like so. Okay, there we go. Pop you over there. We'll talk about what's happened with this in just a moment. So I'm just going to double check. So this is pulled in amp 1, that's good, and that is pulled in amp 2. Okay, so we're just going to make sure it's picking up the fact that it's a full rack, and the height in rack use I believe is 3. Obviously we don't want it to use symbol, and we want it to be drawn in a front view. I think this is just because I was playing with this earlier, so it's slightly different. Okay, so now let's put these into a small rack. So I'll use the equipment rack 2D tool, and I'll say, well, I'm just looking for a relatively small rack with a, we'll call it rack room. Rack room rack A, like so, and I'll just double click to place. And again, I'll change my mind on the number of rack keys as well. Let's go for 12, so it's quite small. So I'm just going to pop each of these racks in like so. Again, there's plenty of room either side. Rack room rack A. And what you'll see here is these objects will now pick up that they are in rack room rack A, and that is in rack U10. And this one is in rack U6. Another useful thing you can do with connectcad is you can draw specific rooms. So I could call this one substage 1, for example. And if I pick up the rack and move it, then the rack now understands that it is in substage 1. And if I were to just create a quick cheeky copy of these, and I'll call this one bulk rail, like this. And then I will just create the equivalent equipment objects for these to exist over here. I'm not too worried about this, but I just wanted to show you a couple of different things. Cool, so these equipment items will now understand what room they're in. Interestingly, you'll also see here they're also telling us what room they are in on the actual drawing. So this one will actually annotate itself with labels. So if I just wanted to unpick this a little bit, okay, I'm just going to change the labels on that for a moment. These will now also picking up that they are in the balcony rail. Again, I'm just going to use a slightly different label so that we don't see that. But something I wanted to show you is quite a powerful feature within Vectorworks, and it's called data visualization. And you can use it to show you various things in a drawing. So we know that these amps are in the substage 1 room, and these these were speakers down here are in the balcony rail. Ignore 1 and 2 for now. I've already placed those. So we can actually create a data visualization to show us visually which equipment are in which room. So I can say which room, like so. And objects are using a specific parameter, and we're working with devices at this moment in time. And we're really interested in displaying the room. Yep. Cool, so this is picking up all the rooms in this particular file. If I were to just look at the color settings, I don't want to color the fills in. Oh no, do I? Go on then, let's color the fills in. We can choose a start and an end color and click OK, and then just choose auto color, like so. There we go. So what we can see here is in this data visualization, anything in red is currently telling us it's in substage 1, etc. And balcony rail are the other colors. So it's pretty handy. It's also a very useful way of checking a drawing. So it's completely possible to create a data visualization where the signal type is not defined, which is quite a useful thing to do. I'm pretty sure I haven't defined a signal type in all mine. If not, I'll have another look at that and fix that. So if I now choose circuit this time, And what I'm really interested in is signal type. Yes. So it'll pick up all the signal types in the drawing, but you'll notice here that there is 3 question marks, and that gets created when it doesn't have a signal type defined. So if we just change that to red and a bit thicker, and make sure that apply is ticked so that it's going to colour those in, we can now use this as a way of marking and checking our drawings. So we now know that we've not yet defined these signal types. So data visualization is an incredibly powerful tool for this workflow. It's really useful. Okay, lastly then, let's now have a look at what happens when an engineer goes on site and plugs this information in. Okay, so let's now just create for ourselves a cable schedule. So we'll just have a quick look at some of the other paperwork we can create first of all. So looking at connectcad's pre-formatted reports, we can pull all kinds of information such as current layer device report. So it's going to give us a list of devices and quantities, etc. And you can also put room in here as we've got here, and we can sort that ascending so we can break down exactly what is in each room. So they're incredibly versatile. Let's just open up a cable report and we'll look at editing this. So if I were to just go to connectcad and then go to current layer cable report. Okay, well let's just assume that the engineer has come in and exported it straight to Excel. We're actually not going to do that workflow here just for the sake of speed, but you can do that. You can then edit the worksheet and then you can copy and paste it back in again. The rules are, if you'd like to do that, first thing you're going to want to do is convert this beautiful report in front of you into a simple list. So it's no longer linked to the drawing. Okay, so that is just a list. Okay, now once it's a list, it's then possible to check all of these rows and literally copy and paste items from the spreadsheet into this. Okay, and connectcad is going to look at all of this information from device names to socket names to everything else. So let's now assume that this information is different. Now because it's not different currently, let's now mix it up a little bit. So let's deliberately plug these in back to front. So this is a kind of an as-built. Engineer has been on site and is editing this. Let's come back in. Let's say that he didn't use output 3. He should have done, but he used output 2 instead on these amp channels. Okay, so I'm now just I'm going to leave this open. I'm going to just make a mental note that that is cable list 16 that we're looking at the moment, because we can now ask connectcad to show us the difference between cable list 16 and the as drawn schematic currently. So if I now then say to connectcad, please compare the cable list and the drawing. You'll see here, this is where all kinds of stuff's changed, as you can see here. So 1 is in use, 2 is in use, but 1 goes down to 4, etc. And this is all back to front. So this is crazy. So we can now see that the schematic is out of date. It's no longer up to date. So I'm actually just going to be quite bold, and I'm just going to hit backspace like so. And I can now ask connectcad to make the connections from the list. Again, we'll make sure we're using cable list 16 and click OK. There we go. And this is now using arrow connections, but there's nothing to stop you from then changing it back to rounded and then playing around with it. So it's then entirely possible for you to get an as-built schematic straight away from particular sheets. One thing I haven't really played with yet, which is something that really interests me, is the ability to show different versions of the schematic and then just have connectcad redraw or at least annotate and show you the difference between each one. And that's just simply by choosing different worksheets in this list over here. Okay, so I hope you found this useful. And we've looked at a few key areas in greater detail. Obviously, the original webinar is still worth watching, the Modelling to Schematics, which is available on the Vectorworks University. That still has loads of other great workflows in it, but this one is mainly looking at exactly what's changed in the workflow in Vectorworks 2022. So I'd just like to thank you very much for inviting me to do the webinar. And just like to open the floor out now and just see if anyone's got any questions in the Q&A.